It was one of those crisp mornings where the lake looked like glass, the kind of quiet you move out here for. I had just settled into my new lakeside home after months of searching for a place far from city noise, HOA drama, and the constant hum of suburban rules. The house sat right on the water's edge, a modest cabin with a dock that stretched out into the calm blue. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, how I could finally breathe without some neighbor telling me my grass was too long or my mailbox wasn't regulation approved. That peace didn't last long. I had been living there for exactly 5 days when she showed up. Karen. You know the type before she even says a word. Tight smile, big sunglasses, clipboard tucked under her arm like a badge of authority. I was working on cleaning out my garage when I heard a sharp knock on the door. Before I could even reach for the handle, she was already talking, her voice shrill and confident. Hi there. I'm Karen, the president of the Lakeside Community HOA. I just wanted to welcome you and go over your membership details. I blinked, not sure what she meant. Membership details, I asked. I'm not part of any HOA. Her smile faltered for half a second before snapping back into place. Oh, there must be some confusion. All residents around this lake are members of the HOA. It's mandatory for property owners in the area. We handle lake maintenance, community safety, and enforce neighborhood standards. She said it like she was doing me a favor. I leaned against the door frame, trying to stay polite. That sounds nice, but this property isn't part of your HOA. I made sure of that before I bought it. Her smile vanished completely this time. That's impossible, she snapped. Every home near the lake is under HOA jurisdiction. I shook my head and reached for the folder I had on my entry table. I actually checked the county records and the deed. My property line runs right up to the lake. There's no HOA listed anywhere on the paperwork. She crossed her arms, the clipboard pressed to her chest like a shield. Well, that's not how things work around here. We've had this community association for years. Everyone pays their dues. You'll need to start contributing immediately. Lake maintenance is due next week, and it's $300 a month. I couldn't help but laugh. I'm not paying for something I'm not a part of. You can check your records again, but this house is independent. It's not governed by your HOA. Her eyes narrowed, and she took a small step closer. If you live by the lake, you're using shared resources. That means you follow HOA rules. If you don't, there will be consequences. I remember thinking how absurd it sounded, consequences for not joining a club I never signed up for. Karen, I'm not trying to be difficult, I said calmly. But I'm not in your HOA, and I don't plan to be. Have a good day. I started to close the door, but she stuck her clipboard in the way. You'll regret this, she hissed. People around here don't take kindly to freeloaders. Then she stormed off down my driveway, her heels clicking like a metronome of irritation. I stood there for a moment, wondering if I had just met the reason people joked about HOA nightmares. I figured that would be the end of it. Maybe she'd check the records, realize her mistake, and move on. I was wrong. The next few days were tense. I noticed her car driving by my property more than once. Once, I caught her standing by the dock, staring at the lake as if she were inspecting it for evidence of wrongdoing. She even left a note taped to my mailbox with a list of community guidelines, all underlined and bolded. I ignored it, but something told me this wasn't over. Then came Saturday morning. I was sitting on my porch drinking coffee when 2 police cruisers pulled up to my driveway. The officers stepped out, friendly but cautious. "Sir, we got a call from the Lakeside HOA president, One said. She reported that you're occupying HOA managed land and refusing to comply with community regulations. I almost spit out my coffee. You've got to be kidding me, I said. Karen appeared from across the street, standing proudly with her arms crossed like she had personally summoned justice. I turned to the officers. I'm not part of any HOA. This is private property. I have the deed and all the documents to prove it. They exchanged a glance, clearly used to dealing with petty disputes like this. Mind if we take a look? One asked. I went inside and came back with the folder. Inside were the title documents, property map, and county surveyor's stamp. One of the officers reviewed it carefully, his brow raising slightly. Yeah, this shows you're not under HOA jurisdiction. Your parcel is listed as independent and predates the association. I looked over at Karen, who was already turning red. That can't be right, she shouted. He's using our lake, our access roads. He's benefiting from the HOA without paying dues. The officer handed her back the paperwork. Ma'am, this property isn't listed under your HOA. He's within his rights. We can't do anything here. She sputtered, looking between the officer and me like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. This isn't over, she muttered finally before storming off again, her heels crunching against the gravel. The officers just shook their heads and apologized for the inconvenience before leaving. I stood there watching her car disappear down the road, realizing that my peaceful lake life had officially turned into a war zone. Still, I wasn't angry, just amused. She had no idea how badly she'd overstepped. Because what she didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly imagined, was that the land her HOA sat on, the one she was so eager to control, wasn't as independent from me as she thought. I wasn't just her new neighbor. I was something far more inconvenient for her, something that would come to light sooner than she expected. After the police visit, I thought maybe that would be the end of it. The officers had made it clear that I wasn't under HOA jurisdiction, and I figured even someone like Karen would eventually realize she was wasting her energy. But Karen wasn't the type to back off quietly. A few days passed in peace, and I almost started to believe she'd finally moved on. That illusion shattered when I found an envelope taped to my front door. It had the HOA letterhead printed across the top, Lakeside Community Association, with a list of supposed violations inside. Unauthorized structure on shared property, failure to comply with aesthetic guidelines, non-payment of community fees. It was absurd from start to finish. I wasn't even part of their HOA, but she'd gone as far as to issue fake fines and official-looking threats. I crumpled it up and tossed it aside, but something told me she wasn't done. I decided to keep everything she sent from that point forward. I didn't know exactly where this was going, but I could feel a storm brewing. 3 days later, I noticed a group of people gathered at the end of my driveway. Karen stood in the middle of them, waving her clipboard like a baton, giving an impromptu speech to her followers. I could hear fragments of her voice drifting through the air, words like compliance, rules, and non-cooperative neighbor. She gestured toward my property as if she were a general pointing at enemy territory. I could feel the eyes of her little audience on me as I stepped out onto my porch. I gave a polite wave, just to let them know I saw them. Karen didn't wave back. She glared at me like I'd committed a personal betrayal. Eventually, they dispersed, but not before one of them left another letter on my mailbox. This one wasn't just a warning, it was a formal summons to attend the next HOA meeting to discuss my repeated violations. The arrogance was unbelievable. I laughed out loud. That night, I sat down at my kitchen table with all the paperwork. I gathered my deed, the county zoning maps, and the records from the assessor's office. The more I looked through it, the more I realized how big her mistake really was. Not only was my property separate from the HOA, but the association itself leased part of their community land from a private owner. I'd seen that name before. It was the same name listed on the property lot records I'd acquired when I purchased my house. I looked again to be sure. It was there, clear as day. The HOA didn't own the land they built half their clubhouse and dock access on. It was leased from the previous owner of my property, the same land I now owned outright. Suddenly, the whole picture shifted in my mind. Karen wasn't just wrong, she was standing on land that legally belonged to me. Still, I didn't want to jump ahead too fast. I wanted to be absolutely sure before I made any moves. The next morning, I drove down to the county clerk's office and asked for copies of every record tied to both my parcel and the HOA's common areas. The clerk, a friendly older woman who clearly knew the HOA's reputation, smirked when she saw the name Lakeside Community Association. "You're not the first to have trouble with them," she said. "They've tried to push boundaries before. But if you've got the original deed, you might have something interesting here." She printed out the files and handed them over. I spent the afternoon reading them at a coffee shop downtown, highlighting sections, cross-referencing details. The more I read, the clearer it became the HOA was leasing land that now fell under my ownership. And not just any land, the very ground their clubhouse, boat storage, and two of their most expensive lakefront homes sat on. By the time I got home that evening, I was calm but deliberate. I decided to play this smart. No shouting matches, no angry confrontations. Karen would get her revelation soon enough. The following week, I received another letter from her, this time in bold, red font, demanding immediate payment of $900 in late fees. She even threatened legal action for non-compliance. I smiled. That was the push I needed. I picked up the phone and called my attorney, explaining everything from start to finish. He listened, then asked for copies of all the documents. After reviewing them, he chuckled. "She's made a huge mistake," he said. "You not only own your property, but they're technically tenants on your land. If they've been collecting dues and making improvements without your consent, this could get serious." It was like holding a royal flush while your opponent bragged about their pair of twos. My lawyer suggested we wait until the next HOA meeting before revealing anything. "Let her double down," he said. "The more she insists, the better it'll look when we drop the facts." So that's exactly what I did. I went about my week, acting as if nothing had changed. Karen must have thought her pressure campaign was working because she started acting bolder. I'd see her standing near my dock with other HOA members, pointing and gesturing as if they were measuring something. One afternoon, I caught them taking photos of my property, probably to build a case for their next complaint. I didn't stop them. I let them dig deeper into their own mistake. Finally, the night of the HOA meeting came. The invitation had said it would be held at their clubhouse on the very land I owned. I showed up 5 minutes early, dressed neatly, carrying a small leather folder under my arm. When I walked in, the room went quiet. Karen was at the front, sitting behind a long table, surrounded by her board members. She plastered on that fake smile again. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," she said in that syrupy tone. "We're glad you came to resolve this issue." I took a seat in the front row, keeping calm. She started listing off her grievances: non-payment of dues, unapproved property modifications, even unauthorized fishing. Each accusation sounded more ridiculous than the last. When she finished, she leaned back in her chair, clearly expecting me to argue or apologize. Instead, I opened my folder and pulled out a few neatly printed documents. "Before we go any further," I said, "I think you'll want to see these." I handed them to the board member beside her. Karen frowned, but didn't stop him as he flipped through the pages. Then his expression changed. His eyes widened slightly. He whispered something to the person next to him. Karen snatched the papers from his hands, scanning them herself. Her face drained of color. The documents clearly showed that the HOA's clubhouse, docks, and several surrounding lots were built on land now owned by me. The lease agreement they'd been operating under had expired 2 months before I purchased the property. In other words, they were technically trespassing. Karen looked up at me, speechless for the first time since we'd met. I gave her a polite smile and said, "You called the cops on me for being on my own property. But as it turns out, you've been sitting on mine this whole time." The room fell silent. For once, the only sound was the quiet hum of the ceiling fan and the sound of paper trembling slightly in her hand. The silence in that room was heavy, the kind of silence that makes you aware of every breath and every heartbeat. Karen sat frozen in her chair, gripping those documents like they might somehow change if she held them tighter. The other HOA board members avoided eye contact, whispering among themselves, while a few residents in the back leaned forward to catch what was going on. I didn't need to say much. The facts were sitting right there in front of them, undeniable, legal, and signed by the county itself. For a woman who spent her days policing lawn heights and mailbox colors, realizing she had no authority at all must have been a hard pill to swallow. I just sat there, calm and quiet, watching her process it all. She finally found her voice, though it came out strained. This can't be right," she said, her eyes darting across the pages. "We've been using that land for years. It's part of the community." I nodded slowly. "It was leased to the HOA by the previous owner. But that lease expired before I bought the property. Which means your clubhouse, your docks, and the land your community events are held on are all sitting on my land." The words seemed to echo around the room. One of the board members, a man with a neatly trimmed mustache and a nervous expression, spoke up. "So, what happens now?" he asked. I leaned back slightly, letting the tension settle. "What happens now depends on how cooperative your HOA wants to be. I'm not an unreasonable man. I don't want to cause problems, but I also don't take kindly to being harassed, threatened with fines, or having the police called on me over something that never existed in the first place." Karen slammed the folder shut and stood abruptly. "You can't just take away our land," she shouted. "That's the heart of our community. We built those docks, we maintain that clubhouse." I looked at her evenly. "You built them on land you don't own, and you never renewed your lease. I didn't take anything away. You did this to yourselves." She looked around for support, but her board members wouldn't meet her eyes. The room that once seemed firmly under her control was now slipping away from her. The authority she wielded so easily was evaporating, and everyone knew it. The meeting dissolved soon after that, with murmurs rippling through the crowd as residents gathered in small groups, whispering and glancing my way. I left the building quietly, letting Karen stew in her own realization. I could almost feel her glare burning into my back as I walked out, but I didn't look back. The next few days were oddly peaceful. No more letters, no more HOA representatives hovering around my property. For the first time since I'd moved in, I actually enjoyed sitting on my porch without worrying about who might show up demanding compliance. But I knew it wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to give up, and I suspected she'd make one last desperate move before accepting defeat. I was right. A week later, I received a formal notice from the HOA's attorney claiming disputed ownership of the land. They alleged that their long-standing community use granted them permanent rights to it. My lawyer laughed when I showed him the letter. "They're bluffing," he said. "There's no legal standing for that. Let them take it to court if they're that foolish." So we let them file. It took about 2 months before the case hit the docket, but those months were worth it. Every day, I saw the cracks forming in Karen's empire. Homeowners started questioning her leadership. Some even came to my door to apologize, explaining they never agreed with how she handled things but were afraid to speak up. When the court date finally arrived, I walked into that courtroom feeling calm. Karen was already there, sitting with her attorney, looking flustered but trying to appear confident. She shot me a quick glance, the kind of look that says you won win. But she already looked defeated. My attorney laid everything out perfectly: deed records, maps, lease expiration documents, even property tax receipts. The judge asked questions, reviewed the evidence, and didn't take long to reach a conclusion. The property in question is legally owned by the defendant, the judge said clearly. The plaintiff's claim of shared community rights is invalid due to the expiration of the prior lease agreement. The HOA has no jurisdiction over the defendant's property and must cease any enforcement or access without written consent. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen's face turned pale, her mouth hanging open as the reality of it set in. The judge wasn't done. Furthermore, any structures or improvements made by the HOA on the defendant's property without authorization may be subject to removal or renegotiation at the defendant's discretion. That was the nail in the coffin. After the hearing, Karen stormed out of the courtroom, ignoring reporters and members of her own HOA who'd come to witness the drama. I took my time leaving, shaking hands with my attorney and thanking him for his work. Outside the courthouse, a few HOA members approached me cautiously. "We're really sorry about all of this," one of them said. "She told us the land was ours, that we had a right to it." I nodded. "I know. But maybe now you'll be able to have an HOA that actually works for its residents instead of bullying them." They nodded, looking embarrassed, and walked away quietly. When I got home that evening, I stood at the edge of the lake, the sun setting low over the water, painting everything in gold and orange. The clubhouse stood across the shore, silent and empty. A few days later, the HOA's lawyer reached out asking if I'd consider leasing the land back to them under new terms. I agreed, but this time the contract was written with every detail in my favor. They'd pay me monthly rent for the land use, cover all maintenance costs, and guarantee that no HOA representative would ever contact or harass me again. If they violated any term, they'd lose access to the docks and clubhouse immediately. Karen didn't sign it. She'd been voted out as president by then. In the end, everything returned to the peace I'd wanted from the beginning. The lake was quiet again. No clipboard-wielding enforcers, no threats, no fake fines. Just the sound of water lapping against the dock and the occasional call of a bird in the distance. Sometimes I'd see a few HOA members using the docks, always polite and respectful now, a far cry from the hostility that started it all. Karen, as I later heard, sold her house and moved away after the whole ordeal. I never saw her again, but I couldn't help but smile at the irony. She'd called the cops on me for refusing to join her HOA, only to discover I was the one holding the deed to her lake, her clubhouse, and her pride. That whole experience taught me something about people like her. Some crave control so badly they forget what they're standing on, and sometimes, when they push too hard, the ground gives way beneath their own feet. I never went looking for revenge, but fate has a funny way of balancing things out. The lake was mine, the peace was mine, and finally, the silence was mine again.